Hello and welcome to today's CDCT Live. My name is Jason Rader, and I'll be your host as we talk about the NIST cybersecurity framework today and going all in on aligning with it from a security perspective. With me today is an expert in his own right, Brad Bowers. He's our senior manager for network and cloud security here at Insight with me. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you, Jason.
So, kicking it off with this, there is an article that was recently produced by me and some great ghostwriting at the back end from an Insight perspective. It's called Facing Down Cybercrime with a Foolproof Strategy. And it kind of aligns with poker, since the theme of the overall tech journal that Insight produced this month was on the Western kind of theme. And but I think it's a great article. You guys should check it out. It's at insight.com. But it made me want to talk to Brad and talk a little bit about NIST CSF. There seems to be a load of stuff coming up related to that. And the article does a really good job, I think, of kind of breaking it down. But from a conversational perspective, what are your general thoughts related to NIST CSF from that perspective, Brad?
Well, absolutely fantastic framework. It's, I think it came out originally in 2014 and then got really opened up for everybody in 2017. But the value that it brings is it provides a holistic approach to dealing with all of the things that us in the security practice have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. From the people, process, technology elements, kind of how to organize and structure a sound security program. So I think it's fantastic. And it's so fantastic, it seems to be being adopted and pulled into lots of other regulatory and other framework pieces that are out there, or at least being referenced to it.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I like the most about it is we find ourselves talking to clients and even people within our own organization. And at its most basic level, the NIST cybersecurity framework is some categories, right? There are 5 different categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. I kind of purposefully use this when I'm talking to folks from a security program perspective, is that each of those areas, if you're talking about a specific use case, ransomware, for example, folks want to go out and find the ransomware tool that they need to buy so that they're safe from ransomware. And we know that is not, that doesn't exist. If it did, that'd be the whole show and we'd be saying thanks and getting that tool. But the reason I think those 5 categories are important is because when you look at it, we talk about layered security all the time. We talk about all of these things. But if somebody says, hey, I'm worried about this, I'm like, all right, let's look at these different areas. Are you covered in all of them? And I think ransomware is a great example of where folks, when we put this up against what they're doing to protect themselves against ransomware, and this is no slight to anyone, but I think it lets you see the maturity of your security program, because a lot of ransomware, the approach to ransomware is let's focus very much on the data protection side and basically focus a lot on the recovery. And when we put that up of, hey, there were these other areas where you could have potentially detected that before they encrypted, and all of your controls that you invested in are in the recovery side, it's better to think that way, because it's better, sometimes the recovery isn't as easy as you might believe, and there's a loss. Definitely got encrypted. You definitely had to recover. There's some kind of loss related to that. And in certain industries, healthcare, I can think of from a HIPAA perspective, if you got encrypted, that means something bad went down and you've got to kind of disclose those kinds of things. So it is a great construct, I think, that to use that way. But again, it's not I don't think somebody's doing it wrong if they're not aligned with it. It's just one of those things I think makes it an easy kind of talking point.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, we get a lot of organizations that tend to focus on that protect and recovery piece and not thinking about the very first part of it, that identify. It seems many organizations struggle with just the idea of, what do I really have? Where's my important assets? What assets do I have? Where are they? How are they? Where does my crown jewels and my really important data reside? And that is, by design, one of the founding pieces, the first piece for the NIST CSF model. And I think it's something that a lot of us struggle with. Organizations know they're trying to keep all the bad guys out, but having a good understanding of what assets exist within the organization, where really the crown, the most important business stuff is, and then putting focus around that to do that protection, to do that detection and response and recovery pieces. Having those other elements in place has to start with that identifying and knowing where everything is. And I think that's just as doubly important for the ransomware piece, because while we always see the ransomware parts being the user that is getting attacked or something like that, by knowing where those crown jewels are, we can put better controls and mitigation things around those. So in that event that happens for all of us sooner or later, something bad happens, that we can have those extra layers of protection by knowing what and where those most critical assets are.
You just nailed it. I think it's and excuse the expression, but it's a little sloppy, I think, in some cases for folks to just figure out the perimeter and just protect everything, right? How about inefficient? That's a better, I'll be a consultant now. It's inefficient to do it that way. And why? Sometimes people would come at us and say, hey, I'm going to secure my whole organization, encrypt everything. And while there is a certain amount of security related to that, there's a huge amount of complexity that you just created for your organization when, to your point, the crown jewels are something you need to protect, but do I need to protect the menu at the snack bar? No. And so understanding and that whole identify perspective, I always say, know thyself, from a Socrates quote. You've got to know the stuff that you want to protect and distinguish it from the stuff that you don't need to protect. And if we're talking about, the buzzwords these days, and I really believe in it, but it's very buzzwordy, zero trust, you can't get there unless you know what you're trying to protect and all the different things that are going on. So I definitely agree. That exercise is one that a lot of people have potentially tried to skip and go, well, we're just protecting everything. They skip the identify, go straight to protect. But it's when you start to get to this efficiency level, which right now we're all at, from the way that security has matured over the last decade, we're at that point now, right? We need to start identifying all of the subjects and the objects, right? The people, the entities that are trying to access things and the things that are being accessed.
Agreed. Completely agree across the board. And there's been a lot of development in tools and solutions that help that, but in a lot of cases, it's a people and looking at how an organization is set up. That's why you'll see, or we see, and when we actually do some of these, there's a lot of opportunity there to be able to identify not only the technologies that are involved in an environment, but how are they being used by a business? And that often can't completely be done by a tool. It needs a human element. And that's why you see a lot of assessments that get done where, hey, come in and help us understand all the data that we have. Where is our crown jewels? And what are those layers of security around them? And are we, to the point of the CSF thing, protecting those in the right way? And are we putting the right amount of resources, dollars, if you will, as well as the human elements of making sure that those are being protected correctly?
Yeah. And I think not just we go to folks every day that not just the data and where that is, but like the things that the data resides on and the things that those things are dependent on. And, I want to move this to cloud. And it gets to be one of these things. And what I always say is that exercise it's a giant undertaking. If I want to find out where all my data is and all the dependencies and those kinds of things, it could take $1 million to figure that out, right? If you outsource that, maybe more, depending on the organization. And the part that I shudder at is that people think they're done. Oh, we've identified all of this stuff. You really don't get any of the value of spending that $1 million, let's say, of effort, time, blood, sweat, tears, whatever it is, to get there if you don't do anything with that, right? It's not the identification of it. Yeah, we know where all this stuff is. It's the protect, detect, it's all the rest of the NIST CSF or any framework basically at that point. So that's the thing is the initiative, I would say, for you guys out there listening, if you're thinking about this kind of aspect, it's more than, don't sell it as that's the thing that we need to do. That's the thing that we need to do the thing that we need to do is more of what that's all about.
And it builds the roadmap. It helps understand where should we be going? Where should we be doing the next step, the protect part? What should we be doing? Where should we be focusing that time? And really even helps identify if there are opportunities or to either consolidate and make things easier. Because if we know that all of our crown jewels aren't in one particular location or are in one location, we can focus around security in the right way. Everybody wins on that one.
Yeah, and I the crown jewels kind of aspect, I use kind of a data classification Venn diagram, if you will, when we're talking about kind of crown jewels. Is there's the stuff that you need for business, that's one circle, and data things, the things that are regulated, there's an overlap there, and then there's the things that adversaries want. Where all three of those circles intersect, that's crown jewels. Then it gets to be a little bit interesting when you start to talk about these things. By the way, things that bad guys want that aren't used for business, why do you have that stuff? That's just risk that's sitting around your organization. But literally, and I was just talking to some folks we were talking about ML and AI yesterday, actually. And I talked about a lot of folks that are creating these data lakes. They're so afraid to lose this data that they need. So they're putting it all in these big repositories, but then they're not doing anything with it. They haven't figured out how they want to model or use this data yet. But if you're just got it sitting there and you aren't protecting it, it's a giant amount of risk to your organization to keep that stuff around unless you have some real way to secure it or you are expecting to actually use it. But people are so that fear of missing out on all of these cool analytics that we could be using is kind of sometimes stymieing some folks into presenting themselves or their organization with more risk.
Agreed.
So, I think one of the interesting things about the article is it's that whole poker thing. And when we originally started talking about this, we were like, oh, well, how do we change our hand into a royal flush? Would that be the way that it would be? I was like, no, that's not really going to apply because first of all, you don't need a royal flush to win a game of poker. You can actually have the worst hand at the table and win a hand of poker, right? It's not trying to get the royal flush. There is no perfect security solution. That's not what this is about. What it is it's winning the game. It's like you might lose a couple of hands. Are you always going to win on the security front? Absolutely not.
All about what cards to throw away and what cards to keep.
Yes.
Security products.
You only get 5 if we're talking about that kind of poker, right? You only get 5 cards, and you're dealt a hand, especially as folks come into organizations. First of all, you're almost never in your career and my career, I've never walked into a place where they're like, clean slate, we're starting over. Let's do this, fully funded. Time is no problem. That's not how it works, right? So it's usually, okay, what's the hand I've got? And there's a level of maturity at all of these things that we were talking about, from the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover aspects. And then you've got to figure out how to play your hand. And you're also in poker playing the guy across the table from you or the other people across the table. There's certainly some art to it. And I think that's one of the interesting things. And you already brought it up, and it's super, super important to me to get this point across. It's more than just the tech. That's one of the cards. It's the process that exists. It's the people. There's another card, could be the commitment that the organization has, because security is going to ultimately fail if there's not leadership that's behind this thing. And you could tell that, by the way that leadership thinks about security. You could tell that sometimes by the org structure of an organization.
Yeah, and we see that a lot, right? So how often have you seen an environment or something where, well, I bought the Cadillac of a particular protection solution, the Cadillac of firewalls, the Cadillac of intrusion detection, or whatever it may be. And they're thinking that that is going to be the answer that solves everything. And the reality is, to your point, you can have the best widget. You have to have those people and process that are supporting it. And the framework kind of offers some guidance around that, which is fantastic, not only in the protect part of the framework, but in the other ones as well. And it helps provide some of the best practices, if you will, on what should be done, how it should be done, and how to put those people and process pieces that are wrapped around the technologies that are bought. And in some instances, the biggest and the best car or hand, if you will, isn't all you need if you don't know how to play it. You have to understand what it is that you have, how to utilize it, and ultimately how to make it part of that overall security posture.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about the security program that needs to exist in a lot of organizations, and I'm also a big maturity model guy, right? So, there's that initial repeatable, defined, managed and optimizing aspect of that. That's also another hurdle to get over, right? It's and also one of those things that's completely necessary before, people want to optimize things or, get those KPIs, those metrics and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, you can't do any of that stuff unless it violates the laws of physics. You can't do this thing without doing this thing first. And I think, again, defining things, that's a heavy lift for a lot of folks. And you just talked about what we would do is kind of lay it out against the NIST cybersecurity framework and say, okay, what's the people, process, and technology here? What's the people, process, and technology in each of those areas? And then figure out, what do we want? What do we want to have? And I think one of those things where, security of an organization isn't the security team's, well, I was going to say fault. That's not what I mean. It isn't only the security team's responsibility, right? It's the whole organization's responsibility, because despite, you can have the greatest fence, but if somebody holds the gate open for you, it really didn't mean anything, right? And I think that it's probably not the guy who thought that getting the fence was a good idea as the guy holding the gate open. So I think that's one of those things where, especially when we're talking from a leadership perspective, we got to get everybody on board to make this thing effective. And I keep talking leadership because the game's really changed. Hey, the game has really changed, right?
Yeah.
It could be super, super affected. It's not just these guys that sit in a dark room and say, no, that's not the security team anymore.
And let's build on that. So, I read a Gartner article, maybe it was a month or so ago, and it talked about how the role of the CISO has changed. It used to be protect, manage risk. Well, now there's been an added element. Some of this is probably from COVID and the world that we live in today, but it also is just an evolution and maturity of what a CISO really is intended to do. And the article kind of outlays that not only they shouldered with managing risk for the organization, but identifying those ways to optimize and reduce cost always, right? So what we're seeing, and one of the nice things about the NIST CSF model is when we look at the next step, that protect part of it, right? Often that comes down to some of the edge and other kind of core security solution pieces, firewalls, intrusion detection, that works its way down to detection and everything else. But those core pieces in a lot of organizations, I see it all the time, it's a disparate group of technologies that through mergers, through acquisitions, through some legacy technologies that they've had that they just simply haven't been able to shed for one business reason or another. That baggage creates complexity and creates risk. And CISOs are really being challenged with helping identify and reduce that overall. And I talk to customers all the time about helping use a framework to line out all the things that you're looking to do and then align those technologies to it and do it kind of a cost optimization piece. Now you bring this back to the card analogy. It's the thing of looking at your hand, identifying what cards you want to keep, which ones you should throw away and grab some new cards. There's always that balance there. And of course, it's always unique for every business, but the process is sound and it can definitely be an effective one for maturing a security program and just getting to a better state.
I think on the detection side, as I think about it from my experience, at least with working with folks, I think that's one of those things that kind of was, everybody kind of pointed to the other side as being responsible for that piece, at least in the last 5 years, right? Because the protect thing was relatively covered. You rattled off a lot of things that a lot of people think about when they think of the protect side. And that's something people really, it resonates with people from a security perspective. The recover side, and I think a lot of the things that we think about with the data protection that we talked about, like recovering from a malware or any of those things, a lot of the infrastructure people, that makes sense to them. A lot of the, the storage folks are real familiar with this concept. So if we got both ends kind of covered, you typically have a firewall team or those kinds of things at organizations. And that's kind of what it depends on where that resides. Maybe that's IT, maybe there's an InfoSec team, but there's kind of the front end and the back end of this thing. And the chewy middle is one of those things that hasn't been well defined in years past. And these days, I think the vast majority of the opportunity from a security programs perspective is that detect and respond aspect. And because it's relatively new, a lot of folks don't have that maturity or that legacy going on within the organization related to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so within that detect space, we're seeing a lot of industry changes too.
Loads.
And
Yeah.
it looks like the NIST CSF model is actually trying to align themselves a little bit better to that. And I'm referring to things like XDR, or extended detection and response capabilities. The use of something you mentioned earlier, the artificial intelligence and machine learning pieces. All of those are becoming more and more in play. And they truly are getting more mature and learning better at how to do things. So on the detection side, where a lot of organizations were struggling with, okay, I need to take logs from my business apps, logs from my Active Directory and my infrastructure pieces, logs from my firewalls, and then I need logs for all these other pieces, and then making actionable intelligence from it. And the CSF kind of gives some guidelines along how to kind of structure some of that, and what are some good examples of ones that you should pull in. And of course, everyone has their own unique ones, but having that foundational ones being laid out is absolute gold, because I think it helps cut some of the noise. Come on, Jason, how many times have you talked to an organization? They're like, we're logging everything. Well, that's fantastic. Are you able to do anything with all that logs that's helping your business, that's actionable, that's giving you what you need to be prepared in that event of a ransomware attack, so you can find it, as opposed to 180 days, which I think is still the norm around this time of how long it takes before someone actually detects that they've been compromised.
Yeah. I mean, what's sad is I've had the same meeting, in the same conversation, somebody say, we're logging everything. And then they'll go, we don't know what we don't know. And you're like, that just crushes me. I'm like, you've got all of this stuff. And, certainly it's a overwhelming amount of things, which is why you can't just rely on, let's let everybody in and then we'll detect them. That's not a good strategy either. So that protect and how it all works together. But I think that, it's those elements that only I think AI and ML are going to help us figure out. And basically the logic is, let's get all of these logs. Let's get something that can basically create these corroborations between what this guy's doing and this guy doing. Let's get some, and I was just explaining this again yesterday, that you've got to have that user behaviors as well. Let's add this to the model. Let's add, okay, so now we know how users and create profiles related to this. Oh, this machine never connects to this machine. Maybe it's normal. Oh, and now there's a huge amount of data that's being moved from here to here. Those things don't happen automatically. I know people are like, oh, well, let's just put some AI on this thing. But having those correlations between those kinds of things, that's what we've attempted to do with SIM products in the day, right? Is just put everything somewhere and be able to create these kinds of things. But now it's evolved so much, but you really can't take advantage of that unless you have those things. Just because you have a Active Directory, let's say, or some type of user directory, doesn't mean you have the rich content that you need, again, correlated to those other events. That's computers are better at that stuff, right? And then they create those models and they figure that stuff out. But that's why I think detection in the past has been kind of those iffy, but these days the tech has really, really caught up. It's still a human being assisted by a computer, but it's one of those things where we're really, I joke that it's a stack of needles instead of a needle in a haystack. Now I've just got all these needles I've got to deal with, and then figure out.
Well, the nice thing is it seems a lot of the technologies are starting to kind of coalesce. You see MITRE out there, who's had their attack framework that's wildly popular and commonly used. I know we use it as well. But having that ability to take events from the endpoints, take events from business machines, take it from internal infrastructure, as well as user behavior analytics, other types of data, being able to blend that and have it be automated and actionable, we're really seeing progression there, right? So MITRE, I think, is leading it out there for a few other industries, or a few other vendors, we'll call it, that are trying to get that common taxonomy, a common language that can be leveraged across endpoint and server and infrastructure and your intrusion detection, all those pieces. So when those events do come into that collection engine, that they are actionable. There is some intelligence there, and you can make sound decisions from it. To me, that kind of goes back to the card playing of reading the room, kind of getting a sense of what everybody's doing, what potential hands they may have, seeing if there's any tells. That type of thing becomes really, really important, and it helps in making a good decision. Do I bail out on this hand? Do I keep it? Do I double down? Whatever it may be, having some of those pieces in place, and the model absolutely helps in providing direction on that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I love the card analogy you just made. It and I was kind of thinking of that. Sometimes in poker you're playing yourself, right? It's what do I need to, your confidence level is going to really affect your ability to win, right? And if you're just folding every time, you're definitely going to lose. So you've got to pick those right things. And again, there's an art. It's not only what's going on, but I do think the tech has gotten significantly better, but it's more than just the tech. Because as you were kind of talking about that, I was like, yeah, if I'm trying to figure out which cards I want to keep, which I want to replace, it's really something I want to build around a team as opposed to build around a technology, right? Because just because the technology exists, it's the team really that I'm building my security program around. And I think people that's been missed in a lot of aspects, but it's so much more important now. And as you acquire that new tech, making sure that it's the right tech for the team as opposed to the other way around.
And it's where so many organizations struggle. How often is it that we see where the event, a bad event, a ransomware event, an insider threat event, whatever it may be, it's in the logs. They've had it for months. They've had it in there, but the users didn't know how to understand it, utilize it. And, so within the NIST CSF model, it's got that kind of respond and recovery pieces, right? And we're seeing that starting to happen in the automation fashion.
Yep.
Obviously, the cloud service providers and the big ones, obviously, are integrating that capability, that automated response. We're seeing it on endpoints from the standpoint of endpoint detection and response capabilities. We're seeing it in our IDS, IPS, and kind of the threat intelligence and monitoring pieces, where it's using that AI to be able to make intelligent, actionable decisions, and in some cases, doing the response automatically, which everyone gets their fur up a little bit because they're like, well, I don't want to make a decision. If it blocks my CEO doing something in the middle of the night, it's going to be my tail, right? So there's obviously a balance there, but clearly the technology is moving in the right direction. And to your point, can't rely on that technology alone. So having that human element and having the AI and ML help nudge, inform, help build confidence in that team that's looking at these solutions or monitoring the scope, is what I used to call it back in my days, finding those elements and saying, oh, well, this is happening, and this is happening. That goes over the borderline of saying something's just not right. It just doesn't feel right or smell right. Let's do something about it. And that automation capability to respond to those events is getting better. It's getting better all the time.
Brad, awesome. I think, back to kind of the point of the conversation, the NIST cybersecurity framework is a great way to make sure that you're kind of covered across the whole thing. Having an efficient security program is going to be one that is taking care of it all along the way, as opposed to putting all of your bets on a single technology or a single aspect of that, like the protect aspect or the recover aspect of that. I think that, I wish, we're both security professionals, we're practitioners for life, right? If there was an easy button, I would talk about it. I wouldn't hide it because I'm a consultant. I would tell everybody this is the easy way. There isn't, and it's one organization is not the same as another. So it's not like even in verticals, oh, everybody does this. So I think it's one of those things where it's a constant journey, but the beautiful things related to automation and AI and ML and these platforms like the XDR and the different platforms that are coming out that integrate these things and make those tools easier. Again, just because a tool exists doesn't mean, I can buy a saw. That doesn't make me a carpenter. I can tell you that much right now. People need to be able to, the tools enable the team, but it still boils down to the team that's able to make these things effective. Any final words for our folks that are out there?
No, for those who are thinking about the NIST CSF model, it's a fantastic one. It gives you that, in my opinion, a good amount of wiggle room to be able to customize controls and security pieces to fit your organization. It's not so rigorous, if you will, as some of the other NIST ones that have come out that are very structured and requires that you must do X, Y, Z in order to get the right thing. I think this CSF has found the balance. It's a blend and gives that ability to have some wiggle room and to make a security program that's going to fit.
Yeah. And again, we kind of use it in some ways, not a way that it was actually intended to be used, but I think it's one of those things that, and that's what any framework is, honestly. I don't know a lot of folks that get super aligned. Some of them obviously are more prescriptive than others, but this is one of those ones I think that just gets everybody talking. And again, as security is more than just the security team, it's the organization. This is one of those things I think that makes it simple enough to give some common ground as we start to talk about it across the organization, as we talk to compliance and as we talk to senior leadership and as we talk to the developers and the infrastructure folks. It's a really good way to have a common language and a way to talk about security and to include it all. Well, Brad, you rock, man. Thank you. You'll have to come back because you're awesome. Everybody out there, if you heard us talking about this article and you're interested in seeing it, please visit us and look for the tech journal that was released at insight.com. And if you'd like to know more about what we do here at Insight at Cloud and Data Center Transformation, visit us at insightcdct.com. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks for having me.